Now, what are the current issues in the livestock industry? I'm going to give you kind of a big overview of some of the big broad ones, but we're going to break these down more as we move throughout the semester. But it's very important to understand that agriculture production is directly impacted by things like current events. So think weather, socio-economic events, things like culture, perception, social media, what's happening on global production, technology, sustainability practices. There are lots of things that impact the pricing and the availability of products in our industry. So first big one that you've heard people talk about over and over and over again is population growth. So how are we going to handle population growth in the world, and how are we going to feed the world? And that's always a concern for us in agriculture because it is our job to feed the world, and we want to do that sustainably. We want to do that ethically. We want to do that in a way that feels good to us as producers and also makes sense to consumers. We also have to talk about things like world hunger, whether that's food deserts here in the United States, whether that's malnutrition over in different parts of the globe, and understanding that world hunger isn't just a easy fix. There's so many things that go into hunger issues around the world and agriculture production around the world. So everything from things like governmental systems to infrastructure in the country, education, location, soil type, climate change. I mean, there are so many different things that, we have thrown at this problem over the years. Things like, we're just going to throw all of our surplus grain over to different nations that need it. And then that's caused a whole host of issues down the line of people couldn't get the food, people couldn't raise their own food. So just lots of different things that we see on a global side, and really understanding that a lot of times a solution is much more complex. It's going to take a lot of education. It's going to take a lot of time, a lot of investment into things like infrastructure and communities and families. And that's something that the agriculture system is really very excited to continue to invest in and work on over the next couple generations. And then the big one right now, and you're going to see this on pretty much every social media outlet that there is right now, is this idea of sustainability of livestock production. And the big one that's coming around right now is cattle are one of the leading sources of greenhouse gas emissions, and that's actually not true. So it's important to understand that beef production, and that's including all of the inputs that go into it, and this is just beef alone, is responsible for only actually 3.3% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And then of that 3.3%, there's actually quite a bit that gets recycled back into the earth. It does not stay in the environment, and we'll talk about that in a couple weeks. So really understanding, we do have land and resource concerns. So how do we use our land well? How do we use our resources that are going into animals, things like water and feed, things like what is the greenhouse gas percentage coming off of production? Are there ways that we can decrease that to be more sustainable? And there's so much research happening on that right now. It's a little crazy. And also understanding right now that the land that we raise animals off of is more often than not suitable for crops. So there's actually 385 million acres of land in the United States alone that can't raise anything. And so it's really good for recreation, raising livestock, and sometimes housing. And so also understanding that, not only do we have land that's not suitable for anything else, so it's actually really productive to put animals on that land, but then also understanding that another big myth that happens or is communicated about our industry is this idea that, they eat all this food that's meant for people. And believe it or not, that more often than not, 2/3 of food that's consumed by livestock is actually not palatable or suitable or healthy for humans to consume. And so it's often byproducts, leftovers, stuff we can't digest. And so this is a very complicated issue, and it's not a quick answer, quick fix, quick research project, and we know. And so just know that right now in our industry, we are going after this issue hard, trying to understand it, make sure that we're clearly communicating what's actually occurring in our system. And then another big problem that we have right now in the United States is the amount of people that are actually involved in the agriculture system. And so that actually for the United States is now less than 1%. And this is where we start to see a big difference between developed and developing nations. So developing nations, usually over half the population is involved in the raising of the food. And in developed nations, it actually averages around 7%. And you're going to see that number higher or lower depending on how developed or developing a country might be. Now, why does this cause a problem for agriculture? Well, let me tell you. A lot of times when we don't have experience in something, we might see a post on social media or we might see something we don't understand and it becomes a negative really quickly. And unfortunately, in animal agriculture, it's a two-folded issue. One, we've had people make decisions and do things that are not okay. They're not ethical, they're not sustainable, they're not smart. And just like any other industry, we've had people make really bad decisions and make this industry look really bad. On the other side of that, we've also had a lot of people that step into a production system, don't understand why we do something the way we do it, or understand why it's sustainable and ethical, and then portray it as a bad thing. And so one of the things that we're really working on right now in the agriculture industry is how do we communicate what we do, why we do it, and what the logic or the justification behind it is. And so that's something that we'll really talk about this semester and talk about how that plays into things like social media and marketing and understanding how do we educate consumers so that they can be a part of this process, even if it's not something they do for a living.